Hello YouTube, welcome to the Hypertrophy Q&A number 4. So this is actually the most popular of the 4 types of Q&As, which means that I might up the frequency a little bit on this one, maybe every 3 weeks, because every month is going to be a problem because of the amount of questions I get, which is great, means that you guys actually want to hear more about hypertrophy, but it's going to start creating a backlog and I'm going to end up not being able to answer your questions. So I'm going to be able to start doing them more frequently starting now. I will also ask, if you want the questions to be fresh and not repetitive, that before posting a question, you take the time to check the previous Q&As and you look at the timestamps. It's easy to find if your question has been answered. And if it has, you can just go in there, get your answer, and be done with it. Because if you end up asking the same question that has already been asked several times, it's just going to create a flood in a sense of text that I'm going to have to skim through to get to the real questions. So please be careful with that. That being said, we're going to get into it immediately, and I'm going to go back to the hypertrophy Q&A number 2 because there were a bunch of questions I hadn't answered. And I'm going to try and make a conscious effort to not spend too much time on the questions because I tend to go too much in detail. So if I answer your question but I didn't get to the certain aspect you wanted to hear answered, just let me know and ask a second question, a follow-up question, and we can get to that. So, Ermin Barjaj asks, I train mostly calisthenics. I am applying cross-training now with weights and running. Should I just focus on the compounds? And the answer is yes, if you want to build muscle and if you want to grow as a bodybuilder, because keep in mind your question is already in a sense answering itself, because calisthenic movements are compound movements. When you do a pull-up, it's a compound movement. It's a polyarticular movement. The issue is you're limiting yourself, because if you do pure calisthenics, you're going to have a tough time doing weighted knee flexions. You're most likely never going to do a hip hinge. I mean, I can't think of a single movement that calisthenic guys do that is a hip hinge, which means you're going to leave a lot of gains on the table when it comes to glutes, when it comes to hamstring development, and also the entire back in general, especially the lower back and the rhomboids, which tend to not be activated as well with calisthenic movements. So if you want to gain size, you need to focus on the compounds. And the compounds are going to entail a vertical press, an horizontal press, a knee flexion, a hip hinge. All of these need to be present in your training. Horizontal pulls, vertical pulls, because they make up the bulk of the musculature you're going to develop, because they stimulate the most muscle fatigue and therefore the most muscle growth. Trey Tipton asks, my only question would be, say on one day I am doing primary movements for back and chest, and that workout is about an hour and a half, depending on how hard I can add, how hard it is, okay? Can I add a ab workout so I would be training 3 parts in one day? So you're basically telling me, can you add abs to a day where you're going to train back and chest? The answer is yes. You can add abs to whatever you want, because in terms of synergy, your core is involved in every single movement you do. So any day is a good day to do more ab work, and you will quickly find also that this is the best way to train your abs. Train them every single time you can, because there is absolutely no point in having an ab day. It's stupid. To go in the gym just to do abs, it's a monumental waste of time. Never do that. Plus, abs are very easy to superset, and you should be supersetting it. Don't do a set of abs and then rest 3 minutes. It's ridiculous. I understand that this is bodybuilding culture, and you see guys do that all the time, but small muscle groups do not need rest in between. You need to superset them. You need to have them in giant sets. So the answer is, you can absolutely slap abs on that day. Keep in mind that the more you're going to recruit the abs and the core via the main movements of the day, the less you want to train them in a sense, meaning that on a heavy deadlift or back day, don't kill your abs. Your abs should already be quite taxed by the heavy movements that you did. But you can still do some ab movement. You can still do some leg raises to stretch the abs and also elongate the spine, which keeps the lower back healthy. Norbert Kruzinski asks, what's your opinion on GTG, greasing the groove? For bodybuilding, you say that volume equals mass. I don't say that. And this method gives a lot of volume. You can do even 10-15 sets of compound exercise every day. Okay, so first off, volume equals mass is not something I preach. I preach intensity, volume, and frequency. So volume is an important part of the trifecta, but it's not the only important thing, because if you just use volume, quote unquote, it means you disregard the weight selection and you're going to just do junk volume, which is useless for hypertrophy. So, in terms of answering that question, Grease the Groove method was popularized by Pavel, and it's mostly for pull-ups. And there's a reason why it's mostly for pull-ups. It's because pull-ups are low impact, meaning that you can do them every day. Unless you weight them, you're really not going to have an issue with it. Unless you're a beginner. People who are relatively advanced in terms of calisthenic movements, in terms of vertical pulls, are able to do pull-ups every day. Unless they really dive deep into their baseline, it shouldn't be a problem. If your form is correct, you won't have any issues with your tendons hurting, and the upper back recovers like this, especially from pull-ups. But it's an exception, it's not the rule. You can get away with that for pull-ups, but it's one of the only movements that actually works that way. Because if you try to do Grease the Groove with bench, for example, unless you really use sub-maximal weight, you will start developing shoulder pains. Same for the squats, you will have knee pain, for the deadlift, lower back pain. Because these movements, while they should be trained frequently, also need time to recover in between sessions to let the structure take a break. So no, I do not recommend the Grease the Groove with anything besides pull-ups. And if you want to try and replicate the method with something else, you need to understand that you also need to replicate the low impact of the pull-ups, which is very tough to do, and for the most part is going to require using low weight, which technically means you're going to do nucleus overload. But you end up with the same issue of nucleus overload being not practical for compound movements because you are going to stimulate too many muscles at once. So it's sort of a problem that leads to another problem that ensues itself. The Grease the Groove method is going to be great for calisthenics. You can do that with push-ups, for example. But with anything weighted, it turns into nucleus overload, which has its own limitations. So be careful with that. Keep in mind also that Grease the Groove, for the most part, is quote-unquote junk volume, meaning that you're getting your ability to replicate that movement throughout the day also shows that you're basically not touching the baseline at all, which means it's low-intensity work. So you have to keep that in mind. Grease the Groove is great to learn a movement, to get technical at the movement fast, but past a certain point, it stops having any effectiveness because your technicality and your mastery of the lift, it's already at its peak. So a big portion of the Grease the Groove stops being effective. Stephen Scanlon, I've heard you talking about frame in an honest way, and you mentioned clavicle length as an indicator. Yes, it's the indicator. Something I'm curious about is clavicle angle. Are those with clavicles almost parallel to the floor at an advantage for trap size, and can exercise change this at all? So first off, the reason why I say that clavicles is the indicator is because when you look at frame, a lot of people are going to look at the size of the knees, the size of the ankles, the size of the wrist, especially the size of the wrist. People obsess over that. And to me, that's not really something you need to pay attention to, meaning that, yes, someone who has a thicker bone structure is going to have a stronger ability to build muscles that are going to be, in absolute terms, bigger. But if we're looking at bodybuilding, it doesn't really matter, because the smaller the joint is, the bigger the muscle that surrounds the joint is going to look. If you look at my wrists, I have below 6.5 wrists, which is small for a male. And yet my arms look massive. Why? Because the wrist makes them look massive. I have 13.5 and above forearms, and they look big because of my wrist. Keep in mind also that just because you have small wrists doesn't mean that you'll have small arms. I am the proof of that. People who tell you that you're limited by your small wrist are idiots. They don't understand human biology. Besides that, I say that the clavicles is more important. Why? Because the clavicle is an absolute measurement, meaning that it's long or it's not. There's no way around it, and it's going to dictate how wide the shoulder structure is. Besides that, you can work for the width of it. You can develop the outer heads of the shoulders, etc., to look wider. But by default, you're going to look smaller and be thicker by default because your frame is smaller. It's narrower. And what you ask here is the angle of the clavicles, which is super interesting because that's genetics. Some people have clavicles that point upward like this. Some people have parallel clavicles, and some people have clavicles that point downwards like this. And the degree of angle can change, but you're right that the angle of the clavicle is going to have an impact on the look of the trap. Because if you have a clavicle that goes up like this, you understand that the room for the trap to exist is much smaller. And if it goes down, you understand that there is more room. But there's also the issue of having clavicles that point downwards, creating also a downward slope for the shoulder. So the shoulders look sloped down, which some people don't like. So it's really up to your preferences in terms of aesthetics and then what it actually looks like on you when you train. I know that for me, I'm narrow, but my clavicles are perfectly parallel to the ground, and therefore my traps have that space, which doesn't necessarily mean that my traps are bigger, but when I train them, it really looks like the entire trap is stretching out, which I think is a good visual effect. So I would say that having clavicles parallel is better than having them pointing up, at least for the traps. But for the shoulders and the look of the shoulders, I don't think so, because people who tend to have that nice look of the shoulder completely separated from the rest of the torso tend to have clavicles that point up. And can exercise change this at all? No exercise cannot change it, but training the upper chest, training the trap and the shoulder will make the entire area of the clavicle, the clavicular area, look different. Training as usual is always the answer. I had a question by Igbo who asks, is there a reason to perform the negative on deadlifts? And I will make a full video on that, so just stay tuned for that, because I will make like a 30-minute video on deadlifts for hypertrophy, because a lot of people say and think that the deadlift is a bad exercise for hypertrophy, which couldn't be further from the truth. It is one of the best, if not the best exercise for growing the entire body. But I'll detail my thoughts in that video. Jesse Bahen. If I'm training arms, should I go back and forth between biceps and triceps, or do just tries then move on to biceps? Okay. So I'm going to right off the bat say that you should do triceps, then move on to biceps. Or you can alternate between the two. What I'm going to put aside and tell you not to do, however, is to do one, then rest, and then do the other. Meaning that you do not want to create singular sets for biceps or triceps. They are perfect muscles to superset. So whether you want to do bicep, tricep, or a tricep exercise that is going to be supersetted with something else, and then in a different set you'll have a bicep exercise supersetted with something else. Those both work. They depend on what you want to create in terms of training, but they need to exist with something else. You can't just do a set of bicep curls and then rest. Again, it's a small muscle. You don't need it. You need to superset it. It saves time, and you can accumulate more volume over time. So if you're training arms, you need to find something that works for you. If you find that doing a bicep movement, then following it immediately afterwards by a tricep movement feels good, then do it. If you like to start with triceps, then do something else, then do it. If for some reason you like to do a press, then biceps, do it. You have to find the magic formula and combo that is going to strike a good balance of muscular endurance, performance, progression, and injury prevention. Because you will find that, for me, for example, if I do a press, then I follow that up with a long head of the tricep exercise, it feels really good. A lot of people will tell you that when they do a press, if they do face pulls after that, it also feels really good on the shoulder. So it's up to you to find what works for you. Kinta Ochu. I've got a weird question. I've been getting back into the game after a long time for health reasons. I'm 6'1", 29-inch waist, which is really small, pretty much skin and bones. For the first time when I'm looking into the mirror, I realize that even though my waist is small for my height, I somewhat have a hourglass figure, small rib cage, I guess. Do you think that indent at the waist can be made up for visually by obliques, serratus lats? So the indent he talks about is an indent I discussed in my pullovers video when I discussed vacuums. And the indent I speak about is, even for people who have a small waist, or who have small hips, usually it's people who have small hips, if the waist is larger than the hips, you're going to have sort of an indent that goes in the hips. So even though you have narrow hips, it still doesn't look right, because the waist above it is big. And the question that he asks is, can you make up for it by building the obliques, the serratus, and the lats? And the answer is yes, absolutely. As you train, if you manage to build up your muscle and reduce your fat mass, the love handles are going to get reduced, so the end indent is going to be less severe, And as you build the obliques, and especially the sides of the abs, and the obliques, of course, because they're the continuation of the love handles, it's going to create an effect of continuity. So instead of having what you described, the hourglass figure, where you go like this, you have that rib cage, then it goes in like this, and then you have those love handles, and it's here, which doesn't look good at all. It's going to be more of a standard look of a V-taper, which is very important. So what I recommend is work on your rib cage extension, do a lot of pullovers so that you can build those lats, do them in the Nucleus overload principle and style if you want to, and train that core. You want to train the core so that it matches the look that you want. A lot of people think, oh, if I train the core, I'll look worse. No, you can sculpt the core so that it looks better. But looking at your stats, 6'1", 29 inch waist, untrained, you have potential to have a pretty gnarly physique. So you need to get back into it. Graceful. Why not just call Nucleus overload high frequency easy sets? It's common knowledge that you can progress, especially for hypertrophy, focusing on volume while staying at least 3 reps away from failure or even more, which has nothing to do with Nucleus overload. I don't know why you would say that. Even if it's more time efficient to train with intensity. Okay, very confusing because you are following three statements that have nothing to do with one another. Nucleus overload, I made a full video explaining why it's called that. It's a marketing scheme. And yes, it's high frequency, high volume, low intensity, but it works for the reason I explained in the guide. And you talk about greasing the groove afterwards, which greasing the groove is not the Nucleus overload method. They are widely different. So yeah, pretty much, that's pretty much what I have for you, Graceful, because you didn't really ask a question, but the grease the groove is different. I explained that in the previous question. Igbo Abazamia. You have used the term irrelevant rep range many times in your video. I am not sure if you have provided a formal definition yourself, but I take it as the following. So then you give your explanation, and you say a relevant rep range is one that, due to its intensity, promotes strength progression and corresponding muscular hypertrophy, which is the truth. Yes, that's what it is. And you tell me that you hear me state that higher rep ranges are typically irrelevant. What is the reason behind this? So the reason is exemplified in the hypertrophy series in the video called Volume Without Intensity. When you look at a rep range and you look at what it does to intensity, when you go beyond a certain amount of reps, you start entering a state where you've started the first, let's say, 5 or 10 reps, so maybe 50% of the set at an intensity that is so low that it's really completely irrelevant. And the reason why you had to start there is because as you rep the weight, your muscular endurance gets fatigued and therefore the intensity increases artificially. That is relative intensity. It's not absolute intensity, meaning that it's not really corresponding to your ability to move the weight. It's in relation to what your body is able to do in the moment under stress because it's being fatigued through the reps. So you see that because of that, you're going to have to start that set with an irrelevant intensity window because your rep range dictates that you have to do 20. And for you to do 20, 10 or 12 of those reps need to be easy, because if they were not easy, you couldn't do 20 reps. And this is the entire idea behind irrelevant rep ranges. You are doing way too much work, and if you look on paper at the quality tonnage, you're not getting as much as you think you are. And then there are other issues that come into play. For example, the fact that you might be limited by your cardiovascular endurance, by mechanical failure if your technique is not clean, and all of that is the enemy of hypertrophy because you're not really challenging the muscular endurance of the muscle. You're not damaging the fibers. Really what is being damaged is your ability to move. It's not the ability of the muscle to move. So that's pretty much the explanation, but I detail that more in the hypertrophy series, so you can go check it out. Dun, dun, dun. What gauge? Could you give an example of moving to evolving rep ranges? Say your 1 rep max bench is 225 and you can do 165 for 10. Would you start doing 165, 3 sets of 6 to 10? Then say you get 10, 8, 8, do you do 170? So all of that I explained in the evolving rep range. You need to select your weight jumps, you need to select the exercise applied to the rep range, and then you are going to have to select the number of sets and the number of reps, and you're going to have to do a beta test to see if it's actually going to work. All of that I've detailed in the past. I'm going to make a video on the beta test aspect of it, but it really is going to be up to you experimenting. This is also why I say that novices shouldn't really be doing evolving rep ranges, because it is an investment. You have to spend some time studying it to make sure that it applies. And once the study phase and the beta test phase is done and over with, you can actually start progressing with it. But if you end up falling and you end up realizing that you didn't do your job properly, now you have to start from scratch, and that could be wasted time. So if you want to save a lot of time instead of just messing up, do your work on paper first and try to see with your eyes and logic if it makes sense. Do you think that this is realistic? And if it is, apply it. Enerjar K. What are your thoughts on neck bridge for neck development? I wrestled through middle and high school, and we did them quite often, but it's been years since I've done them. I have a thick neck, so I think they could have contributed. It's not just that they could have, they totally contributed. Think of what a neck bridge is. Look at what you do when you do a squat. You're on your legs and you bend the knee, which puts the muscle of the quads, the hamstrings, and the glutes under tension. What happens when you do that with the neck? When you're standing on your neck and you're moving the neck, you're flexing the neck, you're putting the neck in a disadvantageous position where it has to strain the muscle to not snap. That's bodybuilding, by the way. When you bend your knee, the resistance of the muscle is for one goal only, to make sure that the knee remains structurally intact. So it's going to follow up the movement by using the muscles to preserve the knee. Same for your neck. Only issue is your neck was not meant to do that. So that's why a lot of people say that neck bridges are dangerous. And it's not necessarily that they're dangerous, because in reality, stress is a normal characteristic, and it's just an attribute and spec of bodybuilding. You're going to feel stress, and the idea that you can just direct the stress to the muscle is it's a pipe dream. The tendon is always going to be put under a certain amount of stress, but it's not bad because it's supposed to. That being said, if you go overboard, it can snap. And the big issue with the neck is that if there is one portion of the body, one bone structure that you don't want to injure, it's your neck. Which is why I personally recommend people, bodybuilders, not athletes, to just do neck curls. Do neck curls in every direction, that's plenty for the neck. There is nothing that the neck bridge does that the neck curl cannot reproduce. If anything, the neck bridge is going to allow for less neck flexion and more tension on the neck through the isometric stretch of holding the entirety of the body weight via the neck. But when we're talking about safety, effectiveness, frequency, ability to replicate the movement, I always recommend neck curls. And I would even tell you to not do neck bridges anymore, because you've been off them for a while and you might not retain the ability to do them now. So that's going to be that. But of course, for people who have been doing neck bridges and who believe that it's not going to impair their ability to stay healthy for the rest of their life, then yeah, just do neck bridges. If it's what builds your neck, just do it. I personally will never do that. Angus Rowe. That's a question that's been in the making for a while, so I'm glad that I'm getting to it now. I'm 19, 63, 175. I'm a week into Alpha Destiny Novice program, and I've only been lifting in total for 3 months. So you are a complete noob. I got super motivated by the Boogs and his method, so tried specializing in deadlift, but along with Jiu-Jitsu 5 times a week, I was getting frequently injured. Yes, that's not good. And decided I don't have the base for the Bulgarian method. Is it wise for me to keep on the Novice program for around a year and then transition to Bulgarian? Keep in mind that Bulgarian is a good, and we say Bulgarian, it's Bulgarian lite, which has nothing to do with Bulgarian. It's Wisconsin method. It is going to be good for strength, meaning that you focus all of your efforts on one movement that you are going to get extremely neurologically adapted to by practicing it every day. So of course you're going to progress on it. But I would urge you to think about what it does to your body in terms of balance. You're focusing on one movement only. And there is not a single movement out there that trains the entirety of the body. It doesn't exist. And even the movements like the deadlifts were supposed to train most of the posterior chain and the back, in reality they don't. Meaning that the deadlift trains the upper back, but not as effectively as most people think, and there are entire portions of the upper back that are completely ignored by the movement. I do think that for someone like you, who trains Jiu-Jitsu 5 times a week, which is, unlike what some people might think, a high-impact sport. It's a tough sport on the joints. It's not tough on the cranium, you won't get concussed every other day, you won't get bruised up, but you do require a lot of tendon health to be able to handle that amount of work. And if you do it 5 times a week, I suppose you're extremely serious about it. So I would tell you to not do Bulgarian, because you're already doing Bulgarian with your Jiu-Jitsu. You are the type of person who is going to benefit from a training program that is going to be more focused and tailored towards maybe 3, maybe 2 times a week of training that is going to focus on compound movements. And if you really want to improve your Jiu-Jitsu game, do something that is actually relevant to Jiu-Jitsu. I would think a lot of grip training, I would think core, flexibility, neck development, the ability to stand up with someone grabbing onto you, the ability to do a lot of bridges with your legs, the ability to be extremely endurant with your guards, to be able to protect for a long time, which I don't think the Alpha Destiny program is going to give to you. In that sense, you might have to make your own program or find a program for Jiu-Jitsu practitioners out there. I have a review of the Alpha Destiny program, so if you want to jump on that, let me know. You need to check the review I made because I'm not a big fan of that program. And I'm not a big fan of most novice programs. You can, if you want, check my program review. I have my personal novice program, which you will find is much lower impact than most, which is going to free you up for more Jiu-Jitsu practice. The reason why mine is less severe in terms of impact is because I do that so that I can leave the novice some potential and freedom to actually develop their own ideals and modify the program based on what they want to do, which is something that you could do also with your Jiu-Jitsu. And just to finish up, but you're 19, you shouldn't be getting injured, especially on the deadlift. This is not normal. The fact that I'm pretty sure that the majority of people who get snapped up are novices, and that is just a testimony to show how bad the novice programs are. You should not be getting injured, especially since you've been only training for 3 months. Keep that in mind. You're 19, you're just getting started. Do you want a career in Jiu-Jitsu? If you mess up your joints and articulations, you won't be able to actually perform on the mats. So pick your battles. Ahmed Essam. Do you think barbells or dumbbells have any edge over the other? Neglecting weight limitations thing on dumbbells, as barbells force your hands to move in a completely different and natural path than dumbbells. Thanks for everything. So if we don't look at the weight, which is really the biggest reason why barbells are better than dumbbells, yes, there is a big difference. And yes, one has the edge over the other. And the one that has the edge is going to be the barbell. The reason why is because, unlike a dumbbell, the barbell moves around your body. And you have noticed that because you say that it's unnatural. I wouldn't call that unnatural. I think that the diminutive stature of dumbbells allow them to not really have to, not necessarily interact with, but compete. They don't have to compete with the body in terms of occupation of the space because they tend to exist outside of it. They exist around it in a sense. The barbell, if you look at the way you hold the barbell is within the body. It's when you hold the barbell standing up, it's inside the center of gravity. And so it's much harder to negotiate with it for space. It's the same for squats, it's the same for bench. You cannot really articulate the barbell around the body via its structure because it's rigid and it's too long, it's cumbersome. So you have to have a mix of an ability to accommodate with the technique and the body structure to make sure that you modify it so that you can espouse the path and the bar path of the barbell that you want to have. And beyond that, there is some level of flexibility and mobility in the barbell itself, which is going to be expressed through the grip. Because in reality, your grip when you squat, your grip when you bench, your grip when you deadlift is going to create completely different matters on which the barbell is going to be hanging or resting on top of the structure. So I do think that because of these technical aspects, I will always say barbells have the edge. simply because things that are more technical open more pathways and they give you more freedom. But of course, freedom, and I'm getting a bit philosophical here, but to have freedom, you need to invest in it, meaning that it's going to be something that is going to pay itself off in the long term, but it has to be invested upon upfront. Dumbbells are much more accessible because they are much less technical in a sense. That being said, there are certain movements that I think, because of what I explained before with the way the barbell is going to interact with the body, are better with a dumbbell. For example, front raises. Why? Because unlike a barbell, with a dumbbell, you can have your arms by your side when you do front raises or lateral raises, which makes a ton more sense. Same for curls. People who do curls with the barbell don't realize that the barbell is pushing the weight in front of them because they can't have the barbell exist within their pelvis, and therefore they utilize a lot of shoulder when they curl, whereas the dumbbell can be used for a strict curl, a real strict curl. Amen asks, what's your opinion on the Body by Rings program by Fitness FAQ? Is it a good starting point for a 14-year-old me? Before I get into actual weight training, I train legs with weights at the moment as my time in the gym is limited to the pandemic. Okay. So I know who that guy is. He's an extremely talented and advanced calisthenic athlete, and of course he preaches calisthenics. This is, however, a bodybuilding channel. So I'm going to tell you that if you end up jumping on that program, it's sort of the equivalent on jumping on like starting strength. Even though those are called novice programs, they are not meaningless and they are not valueless, meaning that they are subjective, they have an agenda, because the way they're crafted via exercise selection is going to define you. Meaning that if you jump on a novice program, most of the novice programs are really powerlifting programs, meaning that they are going to groom you into becoming a powerlifter. And this is going to be the same. You're going to become super specialized on rings. And rings have a very high technical rating. So you're going to invest all that time getting good on them, and you're going to just stick with them. It's the reason why people who get really good at calisthenics have a tough time transitioning into something else. They put so many points in that one skill that now jumping onto something different feels like a hassle, like learning how to squat or deadlift. So I would say that if your goal and your calling is bodybuilding, you need to jump on something that is much more open. A program that is going to let you touch a variety of things, weight training, calisthenics, so that you can find your true calling and your true path. But if you really like calisthenics, and especially rings, then yes, jump on that program. But keep in mind that the learning curve on rings is steep. Abdelal. Probably a stupid question, but I just can't get my head around it. Should you aim to increase tonnage every week or month? Or what time frame? And say, can you allow tonnage to dip and then go back? Say, for example, when you're using 6 to 10 rep system, or you increase weight when you reach 10 reps, then start at 6, so the tonnage would be lower. Okay, all of these I explained in the hypertrophy series in the evolving rep range. It's the notion of tonnage sacrifice. Yes, if you're going to use something like an evolving rep range, or even if you try to grow your tonnage, you're going to realize at some point that to go up, you sometimes need to go down. But the principle of tonnage stability stipulates that it needs to be minor. You don't want massive dips in tonnage, because this would be more of a strength approach where you peak, and bodybuilders don't peak, we maintain and we make small incremental boosts or increases. So that's going to be your job. You're going to have to find in the program room for a tonnage dip that is going to result in a tonnage growth. And across the board, that's the reason why I also like evolving rep range, is because they let you program that. They let you know, okay, on that week, the set is going to go back to 1, and therefore I lose a lot of tonnage. So this is a tonnage sacrifice. Do I want the tonnage sacrifice to be replaced somewhere else by something new that is going to take the spot of that tonnage? Do I want that lift to maybe be the one that is being sandbagged because I want to focus on a different body part? All of those are discussions that I will have again in the hypertrophy series, because there are iterations of sandbagging, but they're important. But you understand properly. You sometimes need to allow tonnage to dip. And there are multiple ways to do that, but I'll get to them. Should you aim to increase tonnage every week or month? However, for that question, tonnage always increases, but it should increase weekly. Meaning that you don't want to schedule monthly peaks of tonnage, because you will find that this often results in plateaus over time because you are creating a situation where you are artificially forcing your strength to grow massively at some periods of time, which is not natural. Your strength should slowly progress, which is also why I preach evolving rep ranges, because they do that. They replicate that naturally. Fatty hacker. If my actual muscles are getting enough rest between exercising again because of my split, do I ever need to take a rest day for my central nervous system? For example, I use a 4-day split and I go to the gym every day, and the muscle group I target always feels ready to go again, but I have heard people say I should take a rest day anyways. Don't listen to these people. Listen to your body. Your body is the number one judge. It's the one voice you need to listen to at all points. I don't care how many scientific studies tell you that you need to rest the CNS. If you're able to keep going, just keep going. I personally have been deadlifting and squatting heavy for the past year and a half. I'm still waiting for my CNS to burn out. My strength has been progressing non-stop, so what is going on here? Well, what's going on is that thinking that something as simplistic as saying, oh, you need to rest your CNS, bro, is actually scientifically accurate is idiotic. It's not. The CNS is more complicated than just being able to burn it out. You can't, unless you're being struck by thunder, you're not going to burn it out. People who say they burnt it out and they lost a ton of strength are people who either got injured, are people who completely mismanaged volume and intensity, which is really programming values, and therefore they overtrained the body to a point where now they did so much work and they thought they would reap the rewards, but they didn't realize that they were spinning their wheels, and now they're trying to apply their would-be strength, which does not exist, and they say, oh, look at all the strength I lost, it must be CNS fatigue, but they never had that strength in the first place. They trained for it, they thought it was going to be there, and it wasn't. And instead of blaming the training, what is that accent now? The training, they blame the fatigue that resulted from the training instead of blaming the fact that they didn't properly manage the parameters of the training in the first place. I hope that makes sense. But basically, don't worry about CNS burnouts or fatigue. It's not going to happen. It's like overtraining. Most people don't even have the ability to overtrain. They shouldn't worry about that. So if your split right now works, keep doing it. New life. Hello, natural hypertrophy. I hear from one Russian bodybuilder that natural athletes can progress in upper body development better if they don't train legs. Does this make sense? No. The idea that a body part is going to grow more because you somehow don't train the others makes no sense. It actually makes the opposite of sense because it's counter-logical. The body grows as a unit. So a body that is going to be limited by a body part that is never trained is going to be a body that down the line is going to be smaller. And the reason is not some bro science of, growth hormone, or if you train your legs, the growth hormone is going to go in the upper body. I don't know if that's true. I don't care. It's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is you need the lower body because the lower body carries over to the strength of the entire body. When you bench, you need leg drive. When you are going to do an overhead press, you need the stability of the quads, the glutes, and the core. If you never train those values, you might end up with an upper body that's so strong that it cannot output its full power because the structure and the base, which is the lower body, is too weak. So that is something you want to avoid absolutely. And the one thing I would say is, when it comes to time investment, it is going to be true at some point that if you become a super specialist, the muscles that you specialize on are going to get more room to grow. Not necessarily because of a magical ability of the body to prioritize one muscle because you are not working the others, but because you have so much time to work on that muscle that it's going to become extremely endurant, and therefore, the more endurant it becomes, the more time you can spend on it, and because you don't train the other body parts, now you can really focus on that muscle. It's the reason why people like arm wrestlers who don't train for size have massive biceps and forearms. They only train that body part, and therefore it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You only train that body part, it becomes more endurant, you have a lot of time to train that body part, so you train it more and more and more and more, and at some point it becomes humongous, but it has nothing to do with the rest of the body being small. If we were in the world of Dragon Ball Z and you could go into the time chamber, you could replicate that on every single muscle. And the guy that has the massive arm could go into the time chamber, train their legs, and their arm wouldn't shrink as long as they keep putting the time to work the arm. It's the flip side of that too is a body part that you spent a lot of time on, intensity, volume, etc., now has become spoiled because it's used to all of that time and attention. And if you just stop giving it to it, it's going to shrink. So that could be a problem. But overall, I would recommend everyone to train their entire body. Energar K. Could you explain why you don't like incline dumbbell curls for bicep development? What if they are coupled with barbell curls? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the reason why I don't like them is very simple. First off, it's light. And there's nothing wrong with training your bicep with lightweight. That being said, a lot of people only use lightweight, and I don't want to encourage that practice. The bicep need to be challenged with intensity as well. And by default, because of the biomechanics of an incline curl, you cannot use a lot of weight because it's a position in which the arm is the weakest. And that should be great. You should think, okay, but I'm only using the bicep now. And the issue is that it's not the case. Most people I see do incline curls, they use the elasticity of the tendon to do their curl. They go all the way and they bounce up, and that's not good. Even if your elbow is fixated by the side, if you extend beyond the range of motion of the bicep, guess what? You're not training the bicep anymore. The bicep is disengaged and you're abusing and using the tendon. And across the board, I see people do that. They do fast negatives on the incline curls and they bounce it up. It's stupid. So this is why I don't like this movement. There's a ton of movements that make more sense. I'm also a proponent of doing your curls and most of the movements you do standing up. That way you can engage the core. And of course, I'm not saying never do that exercise, but it should never be the main driver of progression and hypertrophy for the bicep in a program. If the king movement of your bicep is the incline curl, I don't think you're going to get much results. It needs to be an easy bar curl, a barbell curl. All of these are going to be much more conducive to strength progression. Sanji, how do I properly do hypertrophy work? Do I just do a ton of reps with lightish weight or failure? Do I do it in sets? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, all of that is the hypertrophy series. For anyone who has those questions, hypertrophy series is the reason why I created that. Okay, and we're going to end with that question, and that's going to finish the day for the hypertrophy Q&A number 4 based on the questions of number 2, which is the reason why I need to start making more of these, because I still have yet to touch hypertrophy number 3 in terms of questions, because you guys have been vicious with all your demands, which I really appreciate because it's making this community alive. So, running. Sorry if there's repeats. What's your opinion on symmetrical development? And he says, in his opinion, bodybuilders have way overdeveloped arms and pecs for the rest of their bodies. Okay, so for me, first off, it's a choice. Do you want to be symmetrical? I have certain things in my body that I don't want symmetrical because it's my choice. I want small shoulders. I want the shoulders to be smaller than the arms. I want the pecs to not be overpowering. I want the legs to be bigger than the rest of the body. All of that are not aesthetic canons, and yet I'm going to do it because it's my personal physique preferences. That being said, I do think that symmetry in general for humans is the preferred standard. Even for the face, if you look at the face of people who are deemed attractive, their face is symmetrical. People who have an eye higher than the other, they look a little bit dopey, and you can explain that 1,000 ways if you want and say it's society standard. In reality, it's biological. We are drawn towards symmetry. So symmetry is an important aspect, of course, of bodybuilding. And you need a balanced body also because it prevents injuries. Tips for one arm pec being bigger than the other. That's very easy. You are going to pick an exercise that is going to be low impact, that you can do with only one portion of the body, and that you know for a fact activates that body part, and you're just going to do extra reps. It can be an extra rep with lower weight after your intense sets. It can be 3 to 4 sets at the end of the workout just for that body part, but you need to stick to it. I know too many people who have imbalances and they say, oh, I want to fix it, but they don't really want to fix it because they don't put in the work. It's like people who want bigger calves, but they never train their calves. If you have a bicep that's smaller, you train that bicep more, not with more weight because it's naturally weaker than the other for the most part, but with more volume. That's honestly super easy. I see people who make 30-minute videos about that topic. It shouldn't be. It's very easy to understand. The one thing that could be complicated is finding a movement that you can do with only one arm that is going to actually work that body part. 3, tips for reducing forward gut size. Not talking about the fat. I literally have the roid gut, but big stomach. Look, even my body fat is low enough for abs. Okay. So the gut thing could be a lot of things. It could be that you're eating foods that you don't digest and therefore you're gassy. It could be that you have a lot of water retention in the area. It could be that you eat 2 big meals and you're stretching your stomach and you need to reduce the portions and just spread the meals throughout the day. It could be that you're not breathing properly and therefore there's a lot of air in your stomach. I cannot diagnose you from a distance, but I can tell you one thing. If you build your core, unlike what most people think, it's going to make the core look smaller. And overall, I would say that this is mostly an issue of internal bloating, because you tell me that you don't have the body fat. 4, my favorite physique, and you tell me you really like Mike Menzer. In terms of favorite physiques, I'm going to go into the realm of anime, and I will tell you Adult Gon and Zed from Berserk. When it comes to bodybuilders, I like pro bodybuilding. I'm not going to lie about it. I do watch it intently because it's the pinnacle of the sport. That being said, I don't really like their physique. I find them inspiring. I find them freaky, right? But I wouldn't want their bodies. So if I could name one person, one bodybuilder, not a body that I would like, but a body that I find extremely aesthetic, would be Serge Nubret, that I really like. I also really like Sergio Oliva, simply because of the arm size that I think is really impressive. 5, focusing on heads of the muscle. Okay, I don't know what question is that. You're asking me, can you focus on heads of the muscle? The question is yes, of course. Depending on the exercise you do, the angle of the joint, the angle of the segment, you are going to put more stress on one portion or the other. That being said, the more compoundish the movement is, the more difficult it becomes, because you understand that a compound, for the most part, is going to train the globality of the muscle. And by trying to skew it towards a certain propensity of representing an isolation, you're going to try to turn into an isolation movement, which usually doesn't really work. So my advice is, do your compound movements with the technique that allows you to be the safest, move the most weight, the most frequently, and then find variations and other isolation movements, or you can target the muscle and the body parts that don't grow much from the compounds and hammer them with volume and not necessarily intensity. Okay, that is it for this Q&A. I appreciate you watching it. I will try and be back as soon as possible for the hypertrophy Q&A number 5. Have a good day.